right, welcome back, everybody. Our next session up, I get to talk a little bit, is the VSwitch, IBM, and a customer walk into a bar. Now, we didn't actually walk into a bar, it was a conference room, but we thought this would be more interesting. And it is a different session than other ones we've done today. I thought we'd mix it up a little bit and just cover some technology, but also a little bit of history and reminiscing about how that technology came about. And so I'm very pleased that we have a number of people joining me here today. And so I'll let each of them introduce themselves then. For those that may not know me, I'm Bill Bitner. I'm part of the IBM Developers team here in Endicott, New York, birthplace of IBM, plant number 1. And my job title is Customer Focus and Care. The way I typically describe that is my job is to represent the product to all of you, and then represent all of you to the product. And more recently, to help others understand that approach of design thinking and embracing the customer's view into the development and design. And that's really what this topic is going to be about. So with that, I'll turn it over to Sue, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself a little bit.
Sure. My name is Sue Farrell. I spent the first half of my career in IBM working mainly in the CMS and the file system area, shared file system, server support. And then I've spent the last, it's almost 2 decades now in virtual networking, working on guest LAN and VSwitch.
Thanks, Sue. And Mr. McClellan?
Sure, Bill. Hi there. I'm Bruce McClellan. I'm the current ZVM System Test Team Discipline Lead. My primary test responsibility is for ZVM virtual networking support, particularly in the area of virtual switch function. And more specifically, I've been involved with testing of ZVM's link aggregation support really throughout its evolution, including its initial release and each of the subsequent enhancements that have occurred since that initial release.
Great, thanks, Bruce. Rick.
Hi, everyone. I am, I guess, the token old guy on the panel. I'm a 45-year veteran of IBM. The majority of my career has been in VM. In fact, that last T-shirt I saw about the mothership is pretty much my timeline in IBM. So hopefully I can answer some questions you may have, and feel free to ask me anything.
Thanks, Rick. And from the customer side, we also have Phil Tully here.
Some of you might know me. I'm Phil Tully. I'm Chief Architect at ADP. We have a rather large ZVM and Linux on Z shop, as well as that other operating system, ZOS. This was a very, very big activity for us. And while I was not the lead on networking at the time here at ADP when this happened, they've since retired. So I was definitely involved in it, though.
Yes, you were. All right. So I thought we'd start a little bit for those that aren't familiar with this technology, about, what is a global ZVM virtual switch? What's this thing we've been throwing around, link aggregation and things like that? So, Rick Tarcza, do you want to walk us through a little bit of this? I see like multiple VM systems here and a bunch of lines.
I love those lines, Bill. Yeah, sure. The purpose of the vSwitch, or the intended purpose of the vSwitch, was to make life a little bit easier when configuring large number of guests to give them connectivity to both other guests within the same virtual machine or to the outside world via an OSA Express card today. Rather than connecting OSA Expresses directly to each guest running under VM, we give the capability of defining hardware. So you don't have to go out to Best Buy and and pick up Ethernet cables and such, you can simply just define a virtual NIC card, which under the covers is a totally simulated OSA Express adapter. So from Linux's perspective, we are totally simulating the hardware. And when we do a data transfer from one VNIC to another VNIC, it's done totally by software. It has the reliability of doing it by software. You don't have to worry about an OSA Express breaking down. We just simply do a memory-to-memory transfer within there. The other purpose is not only for guest-to-guest connectivity, but to also connect to the outside world. And here we emulate a layer 2 LAN. It's a totally simulated layer 2 LAN that is done strictly by software. And what we do is we allow a single port on our virtual switch that we've created to connect to a real one or more OSA Express cards. And that's how we get connectivity to the outside world. So if a Linux guest goes to a destination MAC address that does not reside within this layer of VM, we send it to the outside world to resolve that address and send the data out that way. So from the Linux's perspective, he's connecting to a layer 2 LAN, and we are bridging it to the outside world. That's the purpose of the vSwitch. Now, what we have found is that most customers don't use a single image of VM anymore, so we have multiple LPARs involved, each running their own VM image. So today, you would have to define a vSwitch in each one of those images, and each one would be managed separately. So you define all the connectivity for each LPAR that you want via the vSwitch commands, and you manage the vSwitch in that way. Now, this would mean that each and every vSwitch that you configure has to have its own link to the outside world. And what we also provide is in this outside world link is the capability of grouping multiple OSA Express cards in a link ag group. Okay, so once you start having multiple LPARs with multiple vSwitches, we're starting to make things a little bit more complex. So what we did is we developed the concept of a global vSwitch. In other words, to have one vSwitch defined in one partition that basically extends to all three partitions logically. It doesn't really do it in physically, but logically we do that. So what we're trying to do is to allow you to manage your network connectivity across the three LPARs as much as possible to the outside world from any one of those LPARs. And that's what we call is multi-VSwitch lag. In other words, we allow a lag group consisting of one or more OSA Express cards to be shared across multiple LPARs, okay? But the beauty of this configuration is that it can be managed from any one of those LPARs, the connectivity to the outside world. So when you define a port group, which is a group of OSA Express adapters, you define it in one partition, it automatically gets propagated to all the other partitions, so you don't have to define it there. We will do that for you. And at that point, that becomes a shared resource, and you can manage it from either LPAR VM1, VM2, or VM3 in this example here. So you're managing a single LACP group that is being shared by three logical partitions, okay? Now, in reality, with physical switches, you can't share a lag group, right? It's a peer-to-peer communications, but in this case, via smoke and mirrors in VM, we make the physical lag look like it's only dealing with one switch, not 3 virtual switches like we show here, but 1 logical virtual switch. Now, the beauty of this is that any of the virtual switches, whether in VM1, VM2, or VM3, can take over. So only 1 virtual switch will actually manage the lag group at any point in time. But if for any reason that particular VM is taken down for service or whatever, automatically one of the other 2 LPARs will pick up management of the lag. The actual physical switch itself will not even realize that this event occurred. He won't realize that a bunch of guests have gone away. It's totally transparent. The other LPARs are totally unaffected because that's transparent to them. So at any point in time, any one of the vSwitches running in any of these 3 LPARs, which are logically grouped together as a single vSwitch, can take over the management functions to keep that lag group going. So if you want to add additional devices to the group, you can do it for any one of those 3 LPARs. You can add or delete a member from that group or OSA Express card from that group. So it's a common point of management for the uplink port of the vSwitch. And it also allows us to share a vSwitch because from Linux perspective, he doesn't know any of this is going on. He's totally isolated from the actual uplink port, and it's all being managed by the global vSwitch under the covers.
Very cool. And so Rick, we have the bandwidth, right? So you say we support up to 8 of these. So if I have 10 gig OSAs, that's really 80 gig in aggregate in terms of bandwidth.
Yes, that's correct, Bill. And you can add that bandwidth or take away from that bandwidth at any point in time.
Okay, cool. Oh, so if I'm doing perhaps service or something on the OSAs themselves, I can pull them out and add them back in, things like that.
That's correct, and it will be transparent, pretty much transparent to all the Linux guests that are out there.
Okay, and question I see here in the chat was how many of these LPARs can participate in a single CPC?
I believe the limit is 32.
16.
16?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Maybe we talked about 32.
Yeah, it's currently 16.
Okay, thanks, Sid.
Mm-hmm.
All right, very cool. And so we have all this failover. If the physical switch itself goes, is there any kind of failover out there, or is that somebody else's problem?
No, because most configurations will use a split lag group. In other words, they'll use multiple switches to comprise their lag. Like with Cisco, I think they call it ether channel, so that the lag is spread across multiple physical switches. So if any one switch goes, the other switch, the ports there that are still connected to the lag will take over automatically.
Okay, cool. And that's all transparent to the Linux guests.
That is correct. Yes.
All right. Very cool. All right. So I thought it was just valuable to have some background here. If any other questions for Rick or Sue or Bruce, any questions for anyone other than me? So Rob mentions that he doesn't see an IVL vSwitch in here. That may be because I drew the picture and not Rick. But Rick, do you want to mention just briefly what the IVL vSwitch is?
Okay. Yeah. When we define a global vSwitch, it's just a basic parameter that says, I want to define a global vSwitch. And what that does internally, it says, okay, this vSwitch, which is just defined as a global vSwitch, needs to talk to all the other vSwitches in this LPAR and in other LPARs. So in order for this support to work, it's very similar to the ether channel concept with physical switches. you need a common communication link that the switch can use to talk to other switches within the configuration. And the way we implemented that in VM is with a special vSwitch called the IVL vSwitch. Now, we allow a single IVL vSwitch to be defined in each LPAR or VM image, right? And the purpose of this IVL vSwitch is to provide vSwitch to vSwitch connectivity across LPARs, okay, to provide a communication path so that the global vSwitch could do its smoke and mirrors to fake out the physical lag group that there's only really one image of one physical switch or virtual switch out there talking to them. So we have to coordinate that, and we need that communications path to do that. So the basic requirement in order to use a global vSwitch is that the IVL vSwitch has to be defined and fully operational for all this to work. So the IVL vSwitch, it's a little different than a conventional vSwitch in that you cannot connect a Linux guest to it. It's only used for vSwitch to vSwitch communication, so only a global vSwitch can connect to it. And it has to have an operational uplink port that will allow him to get to the other LPARs. Now, this could be just another shared OSA adapter that is used for LPAR to LPAR communications. But it has to have its own communication link in order to support all this stuff.
Great, thanks. I'll let you draw the picture next time.
So Bill, just one point I want to make here is, because this has been a point of confusion and questions I've gotten in the past, is the OSA Express devices that are used for the global virtual switch need to be different from the ones that are used for the IVL, because I know that I've had questions come in before whether the same ones can be used.
Right, thanks, Bruce. That's a good point. That is a bit of a confusion for folks. Thanks. Okay, so I thought next we'd look a little bit back at time, not all the way back to all our careers, but just from a vSwitch perspective and pull down a few things here. And so it was really back in 2003 with ZVM 4.4 is where we really introduced the vSwitch. And I don't know, Sue and Rick and Bruce, was that something you all were just sitting around one day and said, hey, we should do this? Or did that come in as a requirement, or was that an Angela? I probably should mention Angela Macchiano in here somewhere, so now's as good time as any, who was the virtual network team lead back during a lot of this. I know he had a role to play as well.
I guess I would say that it was Angelo that came up with it, but I don't know, Rick, if you were involved back then too or not. I was kind of new to the project.
Well, yeah, given my age, I guess I was. It was actually Angela and I that came up with the idea for the vSwitch. It was based upon our previous support that we did, which was Guest LAN, which was a simulated hypersockets link that will allow guest-to-guest transmissions, but you couldn't get to the outside world with that. So when we developed that prior to this, one of the things that we had on our idea list was to actually connect to the outside world. So while we were designing Guest LAN, we were actually also starting the design for the vSwitch.
Okay, cool. That makes sense. And then, in 5.2, and there were other things. I just pulled out a few things from a vSwitch perspective. I did things like layer 2, external security manager, port isolation for the security fans out there as well. And then in 2007 is when the link aggregation. So prior to that, it was essentially a single OSA that we would support with like some sort of failover capability. Do I remember that correctly?
Yeah, that's correct, Bill.
Thanks, Bruce. And And I see a question that popped up in the chat here. Do vSwitch work using a similar engine of the SSI vSwitch? And I'm not sure what the question means. The IVL uses OSAs as opposed to CTCs in dealing with talking to other LPARs.
Well,
The question is something else. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, basically, when we got the design requirements for this, we were not to consider SSI. This had to work outside of SSI. So some of the communication facilities like the CTC communications that SSI uses today for inter-VM communications, we couldn't rely on. So we had to this support had to work in both an SSI environment and non-SSI environment. And that was the reason why we went to an IVL vSwitch, a different mechanism to do it. So you could use the IVL vSwitch in an SSI, right? But the SSI will still require channel-to-channel communications too.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we
Yes.
can.
Hi, everyone. This is Anna. It was my question. Hey, Bill.
Hello.
So my question actually is, we have a specific configuration to share the switches between the SSI nodes. And I was wondering, how are you going to configure this global vSwitch? If it's a similar way to do it or not, but it seems that it's not. Make sense?
Are you talking, Anna, about where in an SSI environment, when we have vSwitches on different members, configuring them such that they are connected to the same subnet, that requirement?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay,
Good, Rick.
That's a little bit different. Using a global vSwitch in an SSI environment will help out a lot, where you can ensure that you have connectivity, the same connectivity from one SSI member to the other. So if and when you do an LGR, you're pretty much assured that the resources are available on the target system, and the relocation will work correctly. The subnet requirement is that when we do an LGR, we move both the IP and MAC address that Linux is currently using to the other target system. So we can't change that on him under the covers and make the SSI, the relocation, totally transparent. So that's why we have the requirement that you must be within the same subnet if you're going to move a Linux guest from one member to another member. So there are two different things. But like I said, where global vSwitch comes into play here is ensuring that both the target and source system match, so that the vSwitch you're using on the target target system is compatible with the source, so that we can make a seamless transfer.
Hey, Bill. So maybe it's a good time to say why we as the customer pushed for a shared link aggregate vSwitch versus the previous version of the link ag vSwitch.
Sure.
Because I think that's prior to having a shared link ag vSwitch, you could have link ag vSwitches, but you had to dedicate OSA cards to every LPAR. My organization had put in a requirement to us that all network connectivity had to be through link ag. Now, if you've ever seen a map of the ADP VM environment, there's 60 LPARs. and then we have multiple networks within each LPAR. We would have been required to have well over 200 OSA cards to meet our requirements for network connectivity if we had to dedicate VSwitch OSA cards to VSwitches. So we kind of went to IBM and went, we need some help here. And that's really the push here, is that they had Link Ag VSwitches before, but you couldn't share them. And well, our hardware salespeople would have loved to be selling us those OSA cards. My finance team would have been screaming a lot louder.
Right, that was the big driver here. And so if we kind of look at kind of that history of how things change, part of what we would like to do is focus on some of that and how that came about. So yeah, as Phil mentioned, back in 2011 is when this request had come in, right? So link aggregation was out there, but not in this style where the OSAs could be shared across LPARs inside one CPC, right? And so the request came in. Now, at the time, as I recall, there was some executive help we had gotten in VM in terms of, you know, when a requirement comes in, if you can't do it right away, just reject it. And so that's what we did. However, we were told that wasn't acceptable, right? And so that sort of began this this journey, this dialogue that came. Right? And so you know, I don't know, Sue or Rick or Phil, if any of you remember kind of that early dialogue there. I know we got the message that we gave the wrong answer.
Yes. Actually, that was another person, Rich Foley, who's since retired. And he was the one driving this originally, because our network team, who he really interfaced with, and he owned ZVM and ZOS communications, was pushing and says, we have to, we need to put Link Ag, and there's no way anyone's going to let us. So yes, IBM rejected it, and Rich was rather persistent.
Yes, he was. And in many ways, for your environment, especially on some of the machines back then, even if you wanted to buy OSAs for every LPAR, I don't know that we would have had slots for that many.
Possible.
Right. So definitely something we realized then that we started looking at design approaches, right? And we had a sense of what you were interested in, but not a complete sense. And this was still back in the model where we kind of sorted things out before we really got involved in sponsor user engagements and stuff. So I'm sure Rick and Sue remember a little bit about some of the discussions internally about what should we do, what could we do, and what do we not want to do.
Yeah, Bill, that's putting it nicely. We had many discussions. We had many proposals too, and we did put a number of plans together. And I remember Phil being there.
Yes.
And they had they knew what they wanted, and they were not going to deviate from that. And I'm glad they didn't. Because the approach working with them, it turned out to be a big success story for us. So yeah, we were tough at the time because we didn't understand the problem. But what the key thing that we gained here was being able to talk to the customer directly. We could come up with an approach that would work for everybody. And that was an eye opener for the networking team at that time, right? Because, typically in the past, we didn't really talk to the customers all that much. We get their requirements. We look to see how viable they were and when it could be done where. But we didn't have this ongoing, I could say, Phil, monthly dialogues, weekly dialogues in some cases, where we really got to understand what they needed, and we were able to put a plan together.
I think you're completely correct. I think describing that meeting though is pretty important. We had a lot of these meetings back and forth, and IBM invited us up to Endicott. Luckily, we're not that far. We're only a couple hours away. So we a team of us drove up from ADP to IBM and got in the conference room. And Rick presented option number 1 to us. While many of you know me, and I do jump up a little, I didn't at this time because Rich was already standing on the ceiling saying, no, we're not doing that. Rob, Rich Foley, he was like, no, that's not what we're doing. And luckily, they had option 2. They just didn't want to show it to us. And option 2 is the one that we currently have, with some minor changes, but conceptually, it was definitely the one we have. I mean, I think that the biggest difference, and if I remember option 1, because I kind of put it out of my head because I know we weren't doing it, it didn't have any changes to the OSA card itself, whereas this actually required some OSA card changes. It was all controlled by the VM side versus where it should be, where it is. So,
Yeah,
that's. Oh,
go ahead.
It was very interesting. I still remember Rich saying something along the lines when the chart first went up that, I sure hope that's not it. And I know Rick and I and Ange and some others exchanged glances as to whether we flip to the next chart. And I'm glad we did. I also remember, I believe Steve Conger was there, and
Yes.
One of us said, well, this solution 1 is easier for us. And Steve or Rich or one of y'all commented that, well, it's not easier for you guys, for the customer. And that's really what opened up my eyes in some ways, right? In terms of, and I can't remember what all, the things that you mentioned, Phil. I think also the way you do your DR, right?
Yeah. I think that was the deal. The DR recovery would have been almost impossible the way we do it, which is mirroring from site to site. And it would have required major changes at a DR event, which doesn't do.
Yeah. So with that and some other feedback, the requirement was changed to accept. And we started looking more at what that really means to do, right? And so I remember, there were lots of visits in there.
Yes.
I remember you guys coming up in November of 2013 then too, where we had been a lot further, right? And I almost seem to recall we were far enough along that we had some prototype code, perhaps.
I believe
somebody
you did.
I remember, Bruce McClellan, were you showing them stuff or stressing something? I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, we did a little bit of demo work for that. We had to kind of tiptoe around the areas that worked and didn't work at that point.
Well, there was a lot of tiptoeing for a while there, but that was fine. That was the way but that was, you were getting direct input from us, and yeah, we knew you were going in the right direction at that point. I believe at that second visit, I don't know if all the OSA changes were fully implemented.
Right, because one of the challenges, if I recall, and correct me on this, Sue and Rick and Bruce, was the whatever machine it was at the time, the Z13, I guess, wasn't out, which is where some of this was going to be. So we were doing it back on the old machine. That stuff, because we're changing, so they weren't going to ship. So we had that whole challenge too about how do we let you play with something that's going to be on hardware that doesn't ship.
Right.
But we kind of found ways. I remember there was another meeting, then I think this one was in Poughkeepsie in 2014, where more of it was together. And this is the first time we ever tried. I don't know, Sue, if it was your idea or whose idea it was of, well, we can't give them an environment where this is going to work, but can they play on ours? And let you get hands-on, Rich and Skip and you, Phil, and here's the system, play with the VSwitch commands, and just watching you see what happens, right?
Right.
Yeah, we actually, had them log on to the test systems and play around with the commands themselves.
And yeah, and it's pretty much the same as it is, obviously there's been improvements over it, but yeah, it was a long process, but you delivered what we really needed. Currently, our current environment is all 60 LPARs have all of our production LPARs have two VSwitch, two port groups. The one port group has 4 10 gig OSA cards, and that's for our external client access, and our internal customer access is a much smaller workload, and it's a separate port group with 2 separate OSA cards. So, and we're in the process still of migrating our ZVM TCP/IP connectivity over to that internal network, and we haven't changed that only because of internal DNS restrictions that we've had. But yeah, it's become a much simpler, much easier managed environment.
Very cool.
And
then,
the fact that I can tell all of our Linux team that our network connectivity is 40 gig link ag capacity, and they all go, what? So yeah, it's they don't get that at the other platforms.
very cool. So yeah, it did take a while for this to get out, but we really think that because of the dialogues, it hit the mark, and so it shipped shortly after the Z13 shipped, right, which had the OSA changes that went along with this, right? And so that was fun, and somebody said it earlier, the basically monthly calls we had at times to work through things, and as we would give you code and you would tell us things, made a big difference. The other thing I want to call out was one of the things that we've learned since is that as we look at these kind of sponsor user engagements, one of the things that kind of came up was recognizing that while we had load balancing from day one in link aggregation, there were some imperfections when we did the multi-VSwitch link aggregation. Right, and I don't understand them. Rick or Sue could explain it to you, but I know we kind of realized that, well, based on your workloads, what we projected, you wouldn't need the changes way, and so we kind of decoupled that enhancement to ship separately, as opposed to some of the old days when we would have tried to ship you everything, and that would have been out too late. Parts of that would have been out too late.
Right. Yeah, that came out later. We didn't have the issue, and I think there was a question earlier on about connectivity and stuff. All in our network connections that we have with the port group where we run 4 10-gig OSA cards, two OSA cards go to one switch and 2 go to another switch. And actually, each OSA card goes into a different line. I think it's a line card within the switch, so that there's internally there's some separation. So we have it's very high availability in that sense. So you don't. That was one of the early issues. Is some of the Cisco early on, really early on, we couldn't get our network team to turn on lag between the switches because there was some early issues with the Cisco not supporting it across switches. But then they fixed that issue. But by the time it rolled out in production, that was resolved.
Cool. And Bruce, I just wanted to ask you because I've appreciated, Bruce, how you've engaged yourself in these dialogues, right, from as a test perspective. I guess I'll ask you why. Why were you curious about all this, and what benefit did you get out of being involved in all the calls as part of the team?
Well, I mean, for starters, I think I found it to be a fascinating technology. The whole idea that we could virtualize link aggregation across multiple virtual switches without the real switch knowing that this was occurring. So I mean, I found it to be fascinating technology, and I could see where it'd be very beneficial to our customers. And I just found the whole thing very interesting, and was really excited to be involved with the testing on this, and continue to be as we make enhancements to it.
Yeah, I'm always amazed at the different configurations you will pull together. And for those that don't know, occasionally when there are problems in the field, we'll often turn to Bruce as to, is there any way we can try to recreate this, right? And when you think about networking, how many combinations of things there are, that's pretty significant.
Yeah, from a test perspective, one of the biggest challenges is, each customer has their own set of goals, but as a tester, we have to look at it, in aggregate across the set of customers and all the different environments. So, there's a lot of work to try to gain efficiencies in testing these technologies together and trying to bring configurations together that, test multiple things at one time.
Exactly. Cool. So Rick, Sue, Phil, Bruce, anything I missed that you wanted to call out about this kind of journey that really sticks out?
No, I think you've done an excellent job, Bill.
I think from a customer point of view, I mean, and this is really pushing out to the rest of the customers. Reaching out and pushing and getting involved in these activities is very beneficial to you, and it was to us. I mean, my team is involved in any number, and the number I can't remember how many users activities we are with IBM, but sometimes we're heavily involved, and sometimes we just review it and say, oh, this looks good, and move on. But it's the only way we know we can put our thumbprint on what we need to get from the platform. And I really invite other customers to come in and put their needs up in front and say, look, this is what I need. I know you might not have the financial backing of however many IFLs I have, but you know what? You're working with 3 or 4 other people that are pushing this, and you get a lot better bang for your buck that way.
Right. Thanks. Yeah, and I'll part of it that was interesting for me was, while I've talked to customers a lot over the years, it is new for some of our developers, or was new, right? And so I was just really encouraged by, early in this journey, I know they liked having me around when we would talk with customers, but I've been really encouraged by how much Rick and Sue and the rest of their team has embraced reaching out to customers and understanding what their pain points are, and what does success really look like, and recognizing that if the customer is not successful, then we're not successful, right? So I just thank them, and I thank the customers that do get involved in these things. Okay, so one other thing that made this project kind of different was, during all this, we lost a team member, so we all just wanted to dedicate this session to Mary Ellen. It was heartbreaking in many ways. To me, it was also part of the partnership with ADP in that they knew her through these engagements. They knew the impact it had to the team, but they worked with us, recognizing that not the heartache of getting sick and us losing her, but just what that does to schedules and recognizing that we're all people in all this and dealing with it. So to me, it was another mark of the partnership there. So I see we're out of time. There are a few more charts that talk about the sponsor user program. You'll be able to get them in the handout. All right, then Phil, Rick, Sue, Bruce, thank you all very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you for all of you. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks a bunch, Bill, for